And welcome back again, everybody, to the Bearded Baptists. I am Darren, joined again with my partners in crime, my Christian troublemakers, John Swartz and Gene Franciscina. Just a few things to talk about before we start our show. A little bit of maintenance, shall we say, or our theme song, as much as you guys love it, that could be changing. Our intro song, our friends over at Wrath and Grace, it's wrathandgrace.com. We're looking to do some work with them, and we will shortly be using some of their music there. So we're kind of happy about that because it's created by Christian artists. And so anyway, we can kind of support them and get some of their music out there. We'll love to do it any way we can. So that being said, at some point, if you listen to our podcast and all of a sudden you're like, wait, this is the wrong thing. Nope, it's the right thing. We are really looking forward to that in any way that we can kind of help those guys out and come alongside. Also, last episode, we talked about our book club, the book we're going to be reviewing. So Rules for Reformers by Doug Wilson. We're going to take a few weeks to read this book, digest it, dig into it, all that good stuff. And then we are going to have a special episode where we review it. We talk about it, tell about
when
how...
When do you think you want to do that? Do we have a date yet? Do you want to set a date?
We all have to get the books first.
Everybody's got to get the book first.
Well, I got it. Get busy, John.
I know.
Come on, John.
I got a back order of books I got to work my way through, so yeah.
No beard, no book.
But it'll probably be... It's coming... But it's going to probably be like, what, into June? Something like that.
Yeah. Because we'll probably give 3 to 4 weeks per, depending on the size of the book. This one isn't huge, but it deals with a lot of really good content, and we really want to be able to do it justice when we talk about it. So
we could do some special, we maybe talk about that offline. You could do some special shorter clips. Where you just take it in chunks.
Yeah,
one of his points.
Yeah,
one of the rules at a time.
Sure.
You just do like little 15-minute jobs, and so, I don't know.
Whatever you want to do,
Gene. Find a way.
It's your world.
I'm just thinking ahead. As we go through, keep it fresh in our minds, and get a routine going. That might be good.
Yeah, whatever you guys want to do. So. And again, I want to point everyone to our email address, beardguys@sovereignjoy.org. Send us a message. Let us know if there's topics you want us to dive into and talk about. Last show was a little bit of theonomy and post-millennialism, so that's always a fun time. So let us know. Give us feedback. We need to hear from more people than Gene F. Telling us how great we are and that the guy with the big gray beard is fantastic. So, but we do appreciate any kind of feedback, any kind of support that you guys can give us. So, and if you guys notice me and Gene here have nice. Does the light catch my sheen?
A little bit.
Can
got a little bit of sheen.
Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Gene on his last adventure, as he crisscrossed the United States, without us. Anyway, we won't get into that little sore spot. But one thing that he came back, along with a boatload of tobacco that Gene came back with, he came back from the Theonomy and Postmillennialism conference with some sweet beard care products from The Standard. So I don't know if you guys can see that. Probably not. But Gene and I are both sporting some of this beard balm right now. It has quite the manly smell. Doesn't smell like your wife's lotion or anything like that. It gives off a nice aroma, nice masculine aroma. Does a very nice job. I accidentally put a little bit much in my beard last night and had to take some out. But It did do a very fine job, so we thank the guys at The Standard. If you guys want to know more about this beard care product, you can go to thestandardbeardcare.com. thestandardbeardcare.com. So this is good stuff. We really like it. Again, it kind of goes along with our masculine theme of this season, regaining some of that masculinity, and nothing says it more than a fine, well cared for beard.
Yeah, and the cool point is that these are Christian guys.
Yes.
So Tony, I think, is the owner.
Tony,
Christian guy, met him, great guy,
great stuff.
So, if you got a beard and you need beard care, why not
Check
support Christians versus support others that probably aren't Christian?
That make a quality product.
Right? Yeah, and they make a
quality
good
product. It's not woke, right? They're not making this for man buns and anything else. So that's very good to know. But yeah, stay within the Christian businesses as much as possible. And it's good to know about companies like this that you can support financially and get a good product from. So we appreciate that. I'm glad Gene was able to bring some of that back. And we look forward to trying out some other products of theirs in the future. Maybe a growth accelerator for John.
I don't know if they make that.
Well,
this is for men.
Men's but he's got, what John needs is, and I'm not wishing this speaking this into existence, but he needs to go into a coma for like a month, and then then he gets past that
the itchy stage,
he just wakes up and boom, he's got this nice man beard going on, and then he's like, hey, I got this, I might as well roll with it. And he'll be coming
flashes to every 80s action movie. Steven Seagal grows the beard when he comes out of the coma, and then when it's serious, he's got to kick butt, he's got to shave it all off. Back with a vengeance.
This is Steven Seagal though. I'm thinking John Knox. Get that big Knox. John had that John Knox beard in a month, right?
Yeah.
Man.
I think so. I mean, really, if you can grow a really good beard and you don't, it's like a slap in the face to most men. I mean, there's men out there that would love to have a really good beard and they can't grow it, and they're looking at you wasting all that God-given growth potential.
I know. There is glory waiting to sprout from that face, John, and you were denying the glory of the Lord. I think it's time that you just...
The Lord will correct me when I get my resurrected body.
You're right. When you get that body, you're like, whoa, look at this. And it's going to be like this beard down to your belly button. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe they make some kind of...
no one cares about this. We always harass John on his beard.
I know. If no one's ever watched the episode, they have no idea what we're talking about. If they've only listened to this on the podcast, they're like, what are they talking about?
That poor dude.
I know, that poor guy. But, it's all in love. And if we didn't care, and if, we have to speak the truth in love, and we have to call a brother out when he needs to be called out. So that's what we're doing. John
it's kind of related to our discussion today, maybe.
Are we getting into it?
Let's dive in.
Wow, we're only
we should.
We are 9 minutes in, and we're getting into our topic already.
Wow.
So this season has been, our goal has tried to be to talk about practical things for men to do to rule themselves well, their families, their businesses, just the Christian life, right? To live their life from a biblical worldview, but how to do that practically. Because many times, let's face it, there's a lot of podcasts that talk about theology, that get into this stuff, and it's very high level, or it's ivory tower, and it's like, okay, what does that mean for me? If I'm a mechanic, if I'm a plumber, if I'm a engineer, if I'm whatever, a banker, how do I, from day to day life, live out my biblical worldview at my job, at home, at the gym, whatever. So we've talked about that in a few different ways, looking at a few key things. And now this show was kind of, we were going to look at why men don't do this. Why? It's almost like the whole lead a horse to water, right? But you can't make him drink.
Yep.
We can see a problem. All right. We see the problem in the local church. In the Western church, we have just, if you want to talk about a pandemic, a true pandemic, there's a pandemic in the Western church of men that do not lead. They're either just completely absent, right? You see how many women just come to church by themselves, or they are just totally disconnected.
Yeah.
Right. I'm here because my wife wants me here. When can I get out of here? Because the game's coming on. They don't lead their households, or I should say I want to have this specific because men do lead. So whether or not you are leading well or you're leading poorly, you are leading that home. So if you're not leading well, you are leading poorly, but you are leading. So they're not leading their homes well. They from Monday to Saturday, you wouldn't know that they're, had much of fruit or were doing much of anything. You have men that in one camp that just don't care, but then you also have men that will say that they care, but they still don't actually do it. So we're going to look at some of these things, kind of talk about that, some of the frustrations that kind of go with that, and nothing specific, but in general terms. Look, I think we've all been involved in ministry in some shape or form. And so we've kind of all experienced where we have tried to address a need and then nobody shows up.
Yeah. I think, you've done counseling. I've done stuff with financial peace, done counseling there. And, it's probably my biggest frustration. So often people will get it. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
They already admit that they have a problem. They understand that things aren't as good as they would like them to be. They're, looking for answers. You can show what the Bible says, what God's word says is good for them, what it suggests is not good for them. Even lay out some strategies around how they could do it, how they could apply it. And just getting them to actually change, to do it, to take the steps. I don't know. Sometimes I'm at a loss. It frustrates me. It does. In that particular case, it requires you to do something, though, and sometimes that's tough. You have to change something in your life to get a different result. Keep doing the definition of insanity. Keep doing the same thing.
Right.
You keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Right. So I think that's it. I don't know. Is it fear? Is it, I'm not sure, it's kind of like you're an addict. Maybe you're addicted to whatever it is or the way that you're doing it. And so changing is much more difficult. Like in finances, you're going to have to budget maybe.
Yeah.
That's going to be a new practice. Or maybe you're going to have to talk to your wife about, your spending habits or her spending habits that are affecting your overall financial future, and that's uncomfortable. And we were talking earlier, a slightly different topic, but running into a person not that long ago that said that they selected a certain church and were going there because their girls really enjoyed the children's program. And I thought to myself, and shame on me for not saying something, but I'm like, dude, you're supposed to be leading your family spiritually, and you chose your church based on the children's program. But sadly, I think that probably happens a lot more than we realize, that men are not selecting the church or playing a significant role in that.
Right.
And the role should be right, that it's a biblically, that they're teaching sound doctrine,
right.
that we're going to grow spiritually, that there's sanctification that's going to happen, there, that this is a meaningful ministry. I mean, if they have a good kids program, I guess, I'm not a big fan of kids programs in general, but that should be like way down on your list of criteria for why you're going to select a church. I mean, if you're going to list all the things, that's got to be way down there. So like that would be an example. Like I'm sure this man knows that he should be leading and that would be important to select a church that's biblical and all that. But why not?
Yeah.
Does that cause a fight with the wife? Doesn't want to upset the daughters?
Well, I think that's what we've seen, though, because you mentioned it. He's not the one choosing the church, right?
No.
It's the wife, and the criteria are things like, okay, the kids are happy and they're doing whatever, and this church is aesthetically pleasing. The ambiance is nice, right? All things that appeal generally to a feminine perspective, whereas the man should be generally more analytical, looking for the doctrine, things like that. But the fact is that the men are generally absent. They're absent. And I mean, by and large now, the men are biblically illiterate. So they really wouldn't even be able to see sound doctrine when it's right in front of them, or if it's not right in front of them. So then it's left to the woman.
Do you think I don't want to read into that guy, but right. There could be cases where they let that happen because then they have an excuse for not being the one actually discipling their children, teaching their children, teaching their wife.
I mean, you think about it, like, look at now, I mean, we've talked about this, family integration. Family integrated service is tough. I mean, it's tough, right?
Oh, yeah.
You keeping the kids busy, keeping them, relatively quiet. So, it's a lot easier to dump them off and then you don't have to worry about it. But the point is, what's proper? How should it be? Not what's convenient. And I think a lot of this is kind of tied with, again, making changes is inconvenient. Sticking to a budget is inconvenient. All right. Having devotions is inconvenient, especially if it's when the game is on. So all of these things are, again, when we talked about a couple episodes ago, we talked about the old paths and these modern, what seems to be conveniences that are in our lives that actually create slaves, because now you're a slave to those appliances, to paying for things, whatever. Those same things, those conveniences now in the church lead us to fractured families, where you have families that aren't together for worship, families that aren't doing worship together at home. And then it's, okay, well, I don't want to disrupt things. And they, the kids really like the kids' programs. So we're not going to, we don't want to upset them, instead of doing what is proper, doing what God has told us to do.
And ultimately what's good for them.
Yeah.
Because the path they're on, statistics would suggest the path they're on is that those kids will not actually truly come to know the Lord.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I was just thinking about, man, again, I've been in the book of Corinthians, which both 1 and 2, which I think are some of my favorite letters that Paul writes. But he talks about this. He talks about having divided hearts when you're married. So he says in chapter 7, verse 32, I want you to be without concerns. The unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But the married man is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife, and his interests are divided. The unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, so that she may be holy both in body and spirit. But the married woman is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And so Scripture Paul totally acknowledges this in his letter to the Corinthians. He's saying, listen, if you're married, you have a divided heart because you want to please the Lord, but you also are called to take care of your family, to kind of, as the head, think, whether he realizes it or not, he's to think logically, and he's trying to go, all right, how do I meet the needs of this group? And maybe he's using the wrong filter or criteria to make that decision, but his heart is divided. And I think I have served in the local church in a leadership role, and I've talked to a number of guys that just want to give something better to their kids than what they grew up with, or they have fond memories of attending the church, even though they've wandered away from the faith. They're like, man, I think it's just good for my kids to get a sense of morality. Right. So they're not approaching it as though they want their kids to experience Jesus, to come to a saving relationship, to be transformed. They're just saying, I want them to be good people.
Right.
Right. And I think that plays into, all right, well, how do I get them to become good people? Well, I just plug them into wherever and I let the machine. But
isn't that coming from an unbeliever? But what about from a believer?
Well, I think even believers have that same tendency. I think that with believers, we have to remember we have a sin nature that's always battling against us. And so what is the sin in men? It's passivity. Right. That's what Adam had in the garden. Go to Genesis 3. He let Eve kind of make all the decisions, even though it says in the scripture, it says, listen, she tells Satan, I can't even look. I'm not even to touch it. I can't even look at it. You know what I mean? Something to that extent. And where did she get that additional filter? That came from Adam. Adam was probably like, yeah, don't even eat it. You know what? Don't even touch it. Like, he's just flabbergasted. He's like, I'm over here naming stuff. So don't even touch it. You know what I mean? And so there's that passivity there. And so the guy trying to please his wife, trying to please his kids, trying to give them better, which is the right heart, is falling into the trap of passivity. I'll just delegate this out.
Yeah. They're a term that's on the tip of my tongue that I used before the podcast, but I won't say it now for the sake of our audience. But because I really think Gene mentioned apathy, right? Mm-hmm. Before we start recording, I think most men, by and large, we see it because, first of all, they're not doing it in the home. They're not leading well, and I don't think they're even giving it as much thought as we're being even kind enough to say. Mm-hmm. Giving them that much credit, so to speak, right? I think a lot of times it's easy just to kind of find a good church, makes the kids happy, makes the wife happy, let's go there. Right, without examining,
Yeah, I mean,
right.
It's where you get this happy wife, happy life type of stuff.
Right.
I've probably said it too, which is embarrassing, but what a crock.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's like, you live your life by that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we've talked about feminism already, but I think that's another factor, right? That really we've let the sin, the fallen nature of woman from Genesis 3 to desire her husband, not in a positive way, but desire to rule over her husband, to actually manifest itself in his sin of being passive and allowing that to happen and not leading. And so the combination is terrible. We've got, the genders completely out of their roles. The place where they were designed to flourish have been reversed, where you've got women, being told that they need to lead, being encouraged and promoted to lead in terms of our society. And then, and they've almost grown up that way, believing in it, at least at our age. Most of them have grown up in many cases, being told that they should do all these things. You don't want to, be at home, you need to get a job, you need to go to college, you need to do all these things as a woman. So they've been encouraged along that way. And then, men are coming into these situations, and it's easier for them to just do their thing. Right. Man, I'm not going to fight that battle.
Well, we've talked about individualism, right? Before in the show, where the man, right, he has his career and he has his trajectory. The woman then, goes to college and she gets her career. She has her trajectory. And then it's, okay, well, what happens to the kids? The kids are collateral damage, right? Because then it's, now we need daycare and we've got to put them in this. We got to put them in that. And then we put them under Caesar's care. And then it's yada, yada, yada. And there isn't any more looking at it as far as what is the best thing for the family, looking at those choices as in a perspective of the family. And it's really something because we have, it's amazing. Like I'm doing this 52-week plan, and each day you're not in a different section, but I think they split the 7 days into 7 areas. So one area you're in, I started in Genesis, so you're in like historical, then another one's in okay. And then in Joshua, right. Then you're in wisdom literature. So I'm in Job. One day I'll be in Job, then I'll be in a Psalm, and then in an epistle, and then in like a gospel. So today I was reading, and it was in Joshua, and it was where the Lord, where they were going to go and fight Ai. Mm-hmm. And God, remember, before had told them not to take any plunder from, I can't remember the previous city. And you had the one person who did, and he took some of these things. And because of that, when the men went, Achan,
yep.
And they went up against Ai, and they didn't do well. And God was like, no, because one of your dudes basically has taken stuff. Okay. So out of a nation of Israel, all these thousands and thousands and thousands, tenths, or however many of people, one guy took stuff, disobeyed God, and it affected the entire nation. Because God said, don't do it. And he did it. I mean,
I think about that.
Right?
My goodness. Put that scenario to, we'd be like, who didn't take the plunder? Like
we'd be gone.
Oh
right?
God.
I mean, how much stuff that we do that, Jeremiah, over and over again, you've played the whore. You've played the whore. You've played the whore.
Oh.
And God forgives them. But you think, what have we whored with? How much do we play the whore? You play the whore with HBO. You play the whore with this, with porn. You play the whore with, games, right? Oh, you don't go to church on Sunday because your kid has a baseball game. Oh, we've got travel ball. So you're playing the whore with sports. You're playing the whore with video games. Dale Partridge had that tweet talking about guys playing video games. And actually that's old news. I remember back, good old Mark Driscoll talking about guys, video games, and porn. He says that guys would pull their pants up and put the controller down and finally start doing the things that God's told them to do. We'd have a completely different nation. And I mean, this was 20 years ago or so. He said this. And I'm not, endorsing Mark Driscoll, but it's so true. Like, what have we played the whore with? And we've disobeyed God. Like, God has said clearly, do this. And we're like,
yeah.
Like, we can just say that. Like, we can just say, hey, whatever,
Yeah, I said it. I was saying it before. You're sure I didn't say this online? If I said it in the last episode, well, right. Whatever. But the idea that I'm almost can understand better those that are unbelievers hearing the gospel message, hearing, how far short they fall of God and they're dead in their sins and just not accepting that, right? Because I know God plays the role in that, and he's going to save who he's going to save and all that. I can come to terms with that. It's once you have saved people, right? You're part of, you've been adopted by God, and you don't find a way to obey. That just frustrates me. I mean, like, I'm sure that I'm guilty of stuff too, but like every once in a while, you're just blind to certain things. And then all of a sudden you come across something and you get convicted. Like, I want to obey. Right. And I don't know. So why is that? Why is it that people that profess to be saved just don't take some of these things that seriously? I think that's mainly the issue to me. just not taking, like, they don't really, like, there's so much in the church that don't really care about doctrine. That's that, whatever. I just need Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. I just need Jesus. I don't need all that stuff, you know, and kind of only are shallow in terms of their understanding of God's holiness and God's character. I don't know. Maybe those people aren't really saved. I don't know. I don't know what to think of it, but there's not that hunger. I mean, Jesus clearly says, if you love me, you will obey me. And so to not obey is like not loving God.
Yeah. Well, we've completely lost a fear of God nowadays. Because we don't have the Uzzahs that get struck down, right? If someone was struck down. But at the same time, we also have a nation, we've talked about that last episode, that is under God's judgment. And if we don't recognize that, like, how clear could it be when we live in a world right now that is going to say a man can get pregnant? If that is not a wake-up call that we are completely going nuts, I don't know what is. Like, what more in your face could you have that we are in serious spiritual problems?
That kind of stuff makes me want to go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
It wants me to question everything we've been doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you should be literally scrutinizing everything. How did we get to such a bad spot? It's not just them, whoever them is, right? This stuff is bled into the church. Like, we take God lightly.
Yeah.
I was just listening to R.C. Sproul talking about this and the types of worship. And he was talking about when Moses went up on Mount Sinai and how they weren't even allowed to approach the mountain. They had to stay back so far, and they had to wash their clothes for 3 days, and there was all this preparation. And he's like, yeah, I think if you were approaching that mountain in shorts and flip flops, you'd have probably been struck down by God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought it was funny because I listened to that, and the day after I went to church, and for one of the first things I saw was somebody walking in with shorts and flip flops on, and it just made me think of that. But just that idea, like, we'll dress up for a wedding, we'll dress up for this, we'll dress up, and this is what he was saying, like, we'll take these types of events very seriously and want to put on our best. And you're walking in to worship God.
Yeah.
Like, do you really understand what you're doing, or are you just taking it lightly? And that like hit me. Like, how lightly do I take that? What should our mindset be? How would we want to present ourselves?
Yeah, I feel like we so many times you approach it like you would just an event. I'm going to the movies. I'm going to a baseball game. I'm going to church.
Yep.
And it's the same kind of, just not to say flippant, and I'm not, again, I don't want to say that that's everyone's attitude, because I'm guilty of it also, right? I'm guilty of it. And I think part of it, and maybe this is just my old pathsness to be there, is our sanctuaries don't look like sanctuaries anymore. And you know what I mean? Like, you go into, obviously we're not Catholic, and I'm not down with that, but went to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, and it's just like amazing. All the stonework and stained glass. And even though it was a Catholic church, you felt a bit of reverence about it. Like, I would not go there in flip-flops and a tank top. And it doesn't have to be these Catholic churches. There's plenty of Protestant places that have an air about them of, this ain't you're not going to the ballpark here, buddy. This is a sacred place, right? This is serious stuff that's going to happen here. I look at some of these old pictures.
And it's not the place, just to correct.
It's not the place.
It's not the place.
It's not the place at all.
But what you're doing is you're coming, where you're gathered, he is there, right?
Yeah.
This is a gathering of the saints to worship God. right? We're not there alone.
Well, there was a friend that posted a picture from Boyce College of the one chapel, and it was amazing. It was this old chapel that, there's a central aisle, and for those listening, I'm giving hand gestures, but a central aisle on either side. You've got the pews. I thought the pews were funny because they have like the little doors on them that you can lock them in there, and that's great for kids, right? Because they ain't going to go anywhere. You got them locked in. But in the front of it is this beautiful pulpit that's erected, and it's lifted like 3-4 feet off of the floor, and it's the central point, right? It's like when you walk in that place, what the focus is. It's that pulpit. And to me, that says something like that is there for the proclamation of the word of God. And that is the focus. Nothing else. Not, not other things. But I feel like when you walk into that place, I would feel weird if I had flip-flops and, again, not that attire, because some people, you're just, I have to wear a suit to church, and if I don't, then I'm sacrilegious. No, because it all comes down to the heart, right?
Yeah.
All of this comes down to the heart.
Right.
But I think if you're just wearing whatever, I don't know. I think there's something about
going
that.
back to like just if you don't have that reverence, that fear of the Lord, it affects how seriously you take even the word, right? And most people might not want to admit it, but are you really seeking out an understanding of the word in a deep way to understand where you are obedient and where there are gaps and how you can become better? Are you actively pursuing sanctification process through your own study and humbling yourself to say, I'm sure I'm a mess, right? I can think about, 5 years ago, I can remember, and I'm, thankfully doing better in some areas than I was then. And I sure hope that 5 years from now, I'm doing better than I am now. But that doesn't happen if you want to just disregard these things, just slough over them. That's what the false churches do, right? That disregard all of the verses that say that homosexuality is a sin, for example. Oh, we just disregard, we'll just try to find some stuff in there. Well, Jesus never said it.
Explain it away.
Explain it away. And we have a tendency to want to explain away a lot of that stuff.
I feel like it's almost like the pendulum has swung so far to the grace side that it's almost to the point of like anything goes. Because, God forbid you, like what we're talking about here, attire, what you would wear to church. Oh, well, you're being legalistic.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not being legalistic. I'm just saying that for any other thing, right? If we have an event coming up, I can rent a tux, pay that money to go to whatever this black tie affair is. Or if I have to buy special clothing for work, I can do that. Well, maybe a nice shirt, button-up shirt to wear to church. Just something that says, I'm going to church. I'm not going to, WWE Friday night. So, just something. And because I don't think that's too much to say. And in fact, it does come down. Legalism would say, I'm buying this shirt because you want me to buy this shirt. But it should be the heart says, I want to buy this, wear this, or wear whatever, look different because I want to honor God. And I want to be set apart for that day. And I want to, show that in the things that I wear and the things that I do. It would be the same thing, if you and your wife are arguing the entire time, right? You're on your way to church, and then you get there and you're like, oh, yeah, this is great. Big smiles are on her face. Everything's honky-dory. Everything's great. No, of course not. It's the entire heart posture that comes with it that should be present there as you're approaching the Lord's house. So, I thought, what was really Jeremiah Burroughs, that book, was it Gospel Worship?
Yeah.
Talking about that, right? Like they would start several days ahead of time thinking about the Lord's Day and start preparing their hearts to go and to worship the Lord on the Lord's Day. Nowadays, it's like, oh, wow, man, there's church tomorrow. I forgot all about it. Let me set my alarm there. We're not even like focusing. That's like our highlight of the week is to worship on the Lord's Day. But many times it's, I gotta go to church tomorrow. All right, let's again.
Right.
Comes down to convenience and whatnot. So,
John, maybe you can find some Bible verses on this, but think about it. But the like what Sproul was saying was that, and there's several spots, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, where it's pretty clear that God accepts certain types of worship and not other types, right? We can think of Cain and Abel. That's a obvious example, right? But there's others. There's a lot. So what that means, and you got to let this sink in, is that God does think there are acceptable ways to worship him and other ways that are not acceptable.
So it's the concept is that as God is the object of worship, he gets to set the terms of that worship.
Yeah.
He's the central point of the focus and the worship, not our preferences, not our desires, not our convenience. God is saying, because what he wants us to do is to focus in, to hallow him as part of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Make your name glorious. Make your name hallowed. Send it out to the nations. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so that's really the coming together of the saints is really to be that picture, because Paul talks about to the Corinthians when they're arguing over tongues and prophecies and which is better. He says, listen, I would much rather speak 5 words of prophecy than 10,000 tongues, because an unbeliever might come in and my 5 words of prophecy might be the means by which God convicts him. God moves in his heart. But if I'm just there to edify and glorify myself and not making God the center of worship, I'm not being productive in the thing that he's called me to do, which is to worship him. And just something that, because I think with this discussion, we can lose the idea that it's sanctification is a process. And I think what we're voicing here is kind of a frustration, or what's been voiced is a frustration for those that are professing not to hunger and thirst after the things of God, right? Yeah. That's what you're ultimately worrying about. But I just go back to, there's a quote by Richard Sibbes. It's in 2 books that I'm reading that I've read through the second time because I love it. It's Richard Sibbes, The Bruised Reed. And it's that the best men are severe with themselves and gentle with others. And that's something that I've been applying in my own life. As I look at my own sin, I'm not trying to be like, all right, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? I have to look at, all right, why am I not doing what you've called me to do? Right. And I want to be gentle because Jesus he's a king. So he's got all power and dominion. He's a prophet. So he's got all knowledge and wisdom. And then he's the high priest, which means he's full of grace and mercy. And he holds that office because that is fundamentally who he is. He's grace and merciful. None of us have arrived this. Paul writes to the Corinthians, I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 3, he says, our sufficiency is not of ourselves. He says our sufficiency is from God. The reason we've attained this is because God has been gentle to us. God has been gracious to us. And so I think it's important when you have these discussions, when you're trying to lead people into the old paths, when you're trying to shepherd them and guide them. I was just sitting here, I've just been meditating on Samuel just before the people have asked for Saul. They said, this is our king. And Samuel goes before the Lord. He's like, they're choosing a king, right? They're not supposed to be doing this. And God says, listen, they haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. But then Samuel comes before the people the last time. He says in 1 Samuel chapter 12, he says, starts in verse 20. Samuel replied, because the people are like, pray to the Lord, because we've done evil, right? We've chosen a king. We're starting to realize. He says, don't be afraid. Even though you have committed all this evil, don't turn away from following the Lord. Instead, worship the Lord with all your heart. Don't turn away to follow worthless things that can't profit or rescue you. They are worthless. The Lord will not abandon his people because of his great name and because he has determined to make you his own people. And Samuel says, what's my response? As for me, I vowed that I will not sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. I mean, imagine that. Samuel says, listen, you're not following the Lord. I could very easily just be like, I'm not going to pray for you. I'm not going to interact with you. He says, no, it's a sin against God for me not to intercede for your souls. And he says, I will teach you the good and right way. That's the challenge. that as we're interacting with men and women and their families, you got to go, all right, you've stumbled, you've fallen. It would be a sin for me not to pray for you. It would be a sin for me not to teach you the good and right way. And above all, he says, above all, fear the Lord, worship him faithfully with all your heart. Consider the great things he has done for you. That's really the call there. It was when you want people to follow the Lord, is you want to go, listen, have a grasp of your sin. Have a grasp of what it took to make you right. That God, I love this quote. I'm also reading another book. It says The Heart of Christ by Thomas Goodwin. And he says the law was designed for two things: to show God's perfect standard and to show that he is against you. And he said the office of Christ is to intercede for us, because that's the heart of the Father, is to intercede for us, to say, I'm preaching. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Sorry.
Gene's bleeding out.
Gene's bleeding.
Yeah.
Somebody that hasn't, maybe I'll step off the camera just a second.
But that's the heart of the Father, is to intercede, and that's the heart of Christ. Like, and so that's the heart as you have for people. Is like, man, I've got to plead for you, because only the Spirit. Paul again writes to the Corinthians, the spiritual things are discerned because the Spirit gives enlightenment to them. And so really, as you're modeling this, as you're calling to people, you're doubling down on prayer, because only God can bring about his results by his means. And he does that through prayer. But we have to be gentle. We have to be severe in ourselves. We have to, yes, divide truth from error. We have to contend for the faith. But remember, the goal is you're dealing with a soul and you want to build them up, so that they can follow the Lord, and then they can go out and make other disciples, and they can continue and have this and teach their generation to follow. And it's this repeating cycle. And so I don't get lost in the frustration, just as I've been listening.
Yeah.
But call men to be like, man, I just love that. Like, above all, I will not, it is a sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. I would teach you the good and right way. Like, Samuel has every right to be like, you know what? Forget you guys. Forget you guys. You guys never got it to begin with. You guys, this is our whole history. You say, we were talking about this off camera. All right, we want to deliver, but it can't be Moses.
Yeah.
We want a king, but it's not David. We want a savior, but it's not Jesus.
Yeah.
We want the nations discipled, but it's not through us being faithful. We want the big flashy stuff.
I want to, I don't know if it's critique, but I just, a comment about the gentle, right? I think gentle could be interpreted different ways.
It could.
Let's just say.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we live and experience too much gentleness in the way I'm thinking about it. Like, I agree, right? You need to love people and do things in a way that goes, in God's timing ultimately with them, and work with them as you can. But it's kind of like, we were just in Matthew with the meek shall inherit the earth, right? Meek, we think about that
gentle,
as kind of timid, but it's really strength under control, right? And it makes me think of, like, I don't know if you had a father figure in your life, or your father, or if they were ever that person that, when they didn't speak much, but when they spoke, everybody listened. Yeah. And there was that fear almost, like, so I think it's that strength. So being able to speak truth with power and strength that people will listen to. Yeah. Not in a harsh and aggressive way. It can be in a gentle way, but it's but not a nice for being nice, almost a accepting
gentle
type of
gentle
way.
Thanks, Gene, for helping me. Gentle is realizing that when it says about Jesus, is he didn't break the broken reed, or break the bruised reed, or quench the smoking flax. It's saying he didn't bring his power to just snap off at you, right? And I think we're living in such a time where there are guys trying to overcorrect for passivity, that they're becoming hyper masculine. And this is something I listened to Doug about recently. He says it's almost, we're becoming parodies of ourselves, because you got the guys, and I'm going to pick on the beardy guys for a second. You got guys growing beards, hitting the gym, talking about their beards like the way women talk about guys or women talk about each other after they go to the workout. Like, girl, that looks so good. that like
I was thinking about you there.
Yeah.
Like, it's become,
except for the gym part.
It's become,
talking about my beard, but
it's become
leave the gym out.
It's become such a parody of itself that like it's the Mark Driscoll thing. It's the masculinity that has no soul. It's men without chest trying to show that they're tough, when really the meekness is.
Yeah.
It's like tugging on Superman's cape. But I don't need to prove that constantly. I don't need to prove my masculinity all the time. I just bring it into submission and I walk this out gently. The gentle is going, I'm not going to snap and destroy you. I'm going to build you up. And yes, that's not a license to you, because there are pastors that go, oh, this is where I would disagree with, like a Doug or sometimes Toby Sumter, that sometimes use profanity or maybe a coarse word or something. They say they use a serrated edge. I would tend to agree with John MacArthur. It's like, man, don't even let that be named. Like, because the position that you hold, the truth that you're proclaiming is so powerful in and of itself that you don't need to, just like you don't want to go gentle. You don't need to be like the rated R tattooed pastor doing a parody where you can just like let the word speak for itself.
Is that a passive aggressive attack on
Not
me,
at all,
John?
No, I didn't even realize it until sorry, out of the corner of my eye, look at your tattoos. I was like, oh, I'll have to.
Yeah,
I'll have to ask for forgiveness probably later.
I think ultimately we always look to Christ and we see the way that He handled people, right? And I'm not going to go gentle and lonely and all that mess, but we see the woman at the well, right? We see the woman caught in adultery. Mm-hmm. We see this gentleness there, but we also see the Christ that could form a whip that would sit there and, because I think I would love to have seen that. Like, what were the disciples thinking? Were they like, what's Jesus doing over there with those cords? And Jesus is just working away, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's Jesus and the money changers just clearing out that temple. And that there's a time that to have that fierceness, right?
Yeah, but
if we have a brother in sin.
Yeah.
Okay, let's put it this way. All right. You have a brother who is in ongoing sin, but is making excuses. It's this, and I've faced this in counseling. And there's a time where you put the hammer down and you're like, this is enough, man. I've been patient, long suffering, but you know what? My, meter here is in the red because I'm not believing now the garbage that you're giving me. And there's a time that you have to kind of be firm with that. Now that's loving because, right. And you're not crass. I'm not calling the guy, I'm not dropping profanities on the person or anything like that. So, cause I think sometimes people hear gentle and it's equated with nice,
nice and weak.
Right. Yeah. And like never,
I understand.
And people will say that calling someone out is mean. And I think because of that, we've tolerated, like, okay, prime example is a pastor who will call out a false teacher from the pulpit by name.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's so mean. Oh, that's love. That is, stay away from this guy, stay away from that person, because that shepherd has a staff and that staff is not just used for protection against, you remember David, if you want to say it was against bears or lions or whatever, but sometimes that staff had to be used on the sheep and it had to be, hey, look, sheep, you're not going where you need to be going because I'm the shepherd and I know how to keep you safe and I might have to whack you with this staff.
So yeah, no, I 100% yes and amen.
Yeah.
I'm not just crediting that, but I'm also not going to back off the use of the word gentle because I understand what it means and I understand what. So,
that's the reason I brought it up, just because it's the same, and that's why I said meek, because it's often misunderstood.
You're right.
As to what it really means, and that's why I think we have a bunch of really timid, nice, preaching oftentimes.
Yeah, no, because I think if you're preaching through scripture, and this is a tendency, I think we all have our blind spots, so we're going to overemphasize one sin against all the others, right? So if you're a guy that's practicing in secret sexual sin, you're going to be like harping constantly on like the dangers of sexual sin, or you're not going to talk about it. You know what I mean? Or if you're wrestling with anger, you're going to be constantly preaching against anger while you yourself are angry. So we all have those blind spots. And yes, and amen. Jesus used the whip. But there's a book by Wayne Mack called, Anger and Stress Management God's Way. And one of the things that he brings up in the book is, yeah, you can have anger, but you have to realize when Jesus was angry, he was perfectly angry.
Yeah.
So it's not an example for us to go like, you said something I didn't like, or I'm tired, I'm frustrated with the culture around me. Let me get the whip and start beating everybody into submission. It's like, God, am I angry because you're angry?
Our anger is typically because of our selfishness.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're angry because people aren't doing things for us.
Correct.
The way we want them to be done.
Yes.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not anger.
No.
That we shouldn't sound angry.
No.
In this, but it's that sternness that
it's calling balls and strikes. It's calling it straight down the middle, calling it for what it is. Because I've served in the local church. I've done counseling. There were times where I was talking to a brother that was caught in not only sexual sin, but sin against his wife. And you had to sit down and go, brother, it's either this or what you did is something that the authorities get involved in.
Yeah.
Like it's calling it like just laying out the consequences very blunt, and saying, listen, I'm praying for you. I want you. It's 2 Thessalonians 3:4, like, hey, I'm confident that you're going to obey and listen. Right. But if you don't, these are the consequences. Yeah. And so because I think, and that's something that all Baptists, something that was brought to my attention with Baptists, is like that question really. It's like, but did you really believe? Did you really mean that? Where really the expectation should be, I'm trusting by faith that God is going to bring repentance and faith and conviction. And if not, that's on him, right? I'm called to just, again, be faithful, call balls and strikes straight down the middle, let you know. And everybody's going to hear things the way that they hear them. You can't control how somebody interprets what you say. I think that's kind of the fear that's led to kind of that being overly weak.
Yeah.
Overly weak. It's like, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want you to hear it the wrong way. Where it's like, I've sat in the pulpit before I preach and I've still had people come back and go, what'd you mean at that? And I'm like, I spent like 10 minutes defining everything. And you're still like, but that's just where people are. And experience brings out where you're like, man, all right, I can only go as fast as the slowest person. And I don't mean that in like mentally. So I mean that as like, think of like you're marching through the desert and you can only go as fast as the person that's bringing up the rear, so that you're not leaving, if that makes sense.
So we kind of began this episode talking about apathy, and then we got into like proper worship and all kinds of stuff. So
but I think that back to bring it to apathy, I think the apathy comes from people just we're not aware of our sin. We're not aware of the high calling that he's given us. We don't see the things of God as true and beautiful. And that can only be brought through the power of the Spirit and us actually living this out. Like, all right, so if I want to put a high emphasis on worship, I need to, in my own life, be thinking Saturday night, what time do I go to bed? Am I getting up early? Am I reading the passage? If we're in the book of Matthew or you're in the book of whatever, you're not a topical church, but you're an expositional church. Are you reading the passages? You're like, all right, I know this week we're going to be in Matthew 6. So am I reading all of Matthew 6, preparing myself, meditating it, coming in with the expectation of worship? Like, hey, I'm going to sing my heart out. Am I going to greet people? Am I going to sit? And then thinking about, all right, am I going to apply what I've learned just this week? And so those are all the things that kind of break, but you have to practice that yourself. And then as you're doing that, the Spirit will draw men to you or people to you that be like, man, Darren, why do you worship different than I do? What's
my
that?
Dancing?
Why? Like, it just comes down to joy. Like, that's something that I've really wrestled with this past year. Is like, is my worship joyful? Am I joyful?
Do you think we've lost it though? We've partially lost this thirst and hunger for the things of God and righteousness? Have we lost it, and is there something that's contributed to the loss? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you read a book, like you read this book with these Puritans, it seems like everybody was on fire.
Yeah.
Right? And, I mean, their whole lives, they just lived together in just submission to Christ and everything that they did all the time. They had just a positive outlook and were aggressively pursuing these things. And, yeah, I mean, sometimes it just feels like like this is probably unfair, but the average person going to the church is going in there like the ball game or something, or like the movie theater. And it's just, it's a thing we do. It's almost just become the routine, and it's just, we're not really even thinking about what is actually happening.
Yeah. And I think that was true in the Old Testament. And the Lord says in Isaiah 1, your feasts are a bother to me. If you pray to me, I'm not even going to listen. It's because they were going through the motion. They weren't even engaged with the worship. And I think the only thing that can bring that about is you have to be praying, like not just praying, like, so practice those things before Sunday morning, but also be praying for like your brothers and sisters in the faith. Like, Lord, I pray that when we come together, you would open eyes, like you would just, and this, I think that's the thing, is we don't know how to ask God for the things that he's always promised to give us. So we're trying to manufacture it on our own. We're like, what's the technique? What's this? What's the method? And not like, all right, God, you said you were going to give this. This is a promise. This is sure and certain. How we have not, because we don't ask, right? So
I think too, we live in such a age of distraction, that it's easy for our eyes to be focused on something else. The busyness that really it's busyness that is self-created, so to speak, right? Where we are constantly thinking of the next thing and the next thing. And all right, I go to church, but after church, I've got to go do this. I've got to do that. Or I got to get out because it's our time that we're going to go down to the beach, or we're going to go do this. Whereas, the Puritans, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have all these things. We have electronics now that you have places that were ruled by, the sunrise and sunset. We don't have that anymore. We can,
that's a good point.
Stay up all night.
Kind of related to the old paths, right?
It really is.
You can make a conscious effort to shed some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need to fill your schedule.
Right.
Like that with
don't.
All these things. You don't have to have the kids involved in 1,500 different things.
It comes down to the choices you make, right?
Absolutely.
And then,
and where your priorities
are. So, all right, guys. I think it's going to probably wrap it up. We're looking at, again, devoting yourself to those the things that the Lord has said, as far as preparing our hearts for worship before Sundays, and looking at our own selves and our own sin and our personal sanctification, and encouraging the brothers around us to come alongside them and encourage them in their walk. So, again, if you need some fine beard care products, be sure to check out The Standard. Hit Tony up at thestandardbeardcare.com. If you want to follow along with us, the book of the month right now is Doug Wilson's Rules for Reformers. I'll find my place. If you want to pick up a copy, we'll have a link to that in the show notes, along with some other helps for you guys on your walk, to help you kind of live out that life, help you disciple your family, help you to lead your children in the paths. So, again, hit us up at beardguys@sovereignjoy.org if you want to send us a message. Thanks, guys, for being here. Again, thank you guys for listening, watching, liking, subscribing, telling other people about us. Again, look for our new intro, outro music. Should be coming up soon. Otherwise, just, continue to walk in the ways of the Lord, lead your families, follow, be involved in your local churches, help your pastors, bring dominion to the earth. Right, guys? So,
amen.
That's what it's about. We'll see you guys next time. This is the Bearded Baptist.